Hey guys, today we're going to be going into chapter 11, which is types of surveys. So this is when you physically go out and you ask people their opinions about things. So your main goals of a survey is to find a sample of people and then get data from them and make predictions based off of what you get in your survey that you hope represents the entire population. So when I go out and ask people how many times a week they get Starbucks, I'm going to hope that the average number that I get from my survey is representative of all people in that area. So another objective of a survey is to avoid bias. By bias, I don't mean my personal bias, I mean getting a sample that is not particularly good. For example, in my Starbucks survey, if I go to Starbucks and ask people how many times a week they go to Starbucks, then I'm likely going to miss a lot of people that just don't go at all. So that would be a major source of bias. And again, that ties into our third objective, which is finding these sources of bias and eliminating them. So some main guidelines for sampling and surveying is to 1, randomize. So you always want a good representative sample, and randomization helps a lot. Because if you handpick who you're going to survey, your own human nature is probably going to make some bias occur. Then you have to find a good sample size. If I sample 2 people about how many times they go out for coffee, that's likely not going to be very representative because our sample size is way too small. But if we sample too many people, that's going to be time and cost inefficient. A third thing you need to remember is that any data that we get from our samples is called our statistics. So if I go out and ask 50 people how many times a week they go out for Starbucks, and then I get an average of 2.3 days, then 2.3 is our statistic. And then we use these statistics to make predictions about the population. And the information about the population, so the average number of times everyone in America goes out for coffee, is our population parameters. So information about samples is called statistics, and information about populations is called parameters. Next, we have a word called the sampling frame. So this is the list of people that we're drawing our sample from. So for example, if we take a list, so we could say, oh, these are kind of old, a phone book, and then we go through everyone and we draw some random people to ask, then the phone book is our sampling frame. Next, we have our sampling variability. So this is the variation between samples that you're getting. So if I ask 50 people how many times to go out for Starbucks every week, and I get 2.3, and then I go and ask another 50 people, and this time I get 3.1, then that shows sample to sample variation or sampling variability. This is not a bad thing, and it's actually very telling of how good your samples are. So if you're getting a lot of variation between samples, so if in one sample I'm getting 7 times a week, and on the other hand I'm getting 1 time a week from 2 different samples, then we know that there's probably a problem. We want sampling variability to exist, but we want to keep it small, so can't have too much of a good thing. Next, we have a census. You've probably heard of this, and the one that the US uses is a very good way of remembering it. It's when you try and get information from every single person in the population. This isn't done very often because it is so time-consuming and costs a lot of money. So if you have a smaller population though, a census is not a bad idea. So a bit of practice. You can pause the video and try to work this out for yourself based on the stuff we did over here. The first one is a list of all American teachers that you will choose people to survey from. When you see the word list, you should automatically think sampling frame. So this is the list of people that we're drawing our random people to survey from. Next, we have asking every teacher in a school for their opinion on something. Note the word every, so that would imply census, since we're asking every single person in a population, so a school. There are a lot of sampling types. These are the main 3 that you see the most. The first one is an SRS, so simple random sample. It's when you have a big population and then you sit and randomly draw people out of the population. So each person has an equal chance of being chosen. So this is when I go into a school and then I randomly pick 3 kids out of them to ask about their favorite food. Next, we have stratified sampling. So this is the one that we do when we want information from certain groups. So you split the population into homogeneous groups first, and then you take a simple random sample of each mini group. If I went and I split a school into girls and boys, and then I did a simple random sample of the girls and a simple random sample of the boys, that would be stratified sampling. And I created mini groups, so our strata is what they're called, based on gender. So this is meant to reduce some variation between samples because you could have two distinct strata that are very, very different in terms of traits that you're surveying about. Next, we have cluster sampling. This one is very, very similar to stratified sampling, and they're easy to get mixed up. The main difference here is that a stratified sample splits the population into homogeneous groups, but the cluster sampling takes a heterogeneous group. So what you're doing is you go and you get a group of people that have a lot of variation between them. So you get a heterogeneous group, and then you take a census of that group. So it's a more efficient way if you're short on budget and time, but it rests a lot on hope that your group is representative of an entire population. So this would be if you went into a stadium and then you wanted to get people's opinions on something and you randomly just chose a row of people to survey. So the row of people is your heterogeneous group because you didn't pick anyone based on their traits. And then if you ask everyone in the row, you've taken a census of the group. So some quick practice on that. Our first one is using a random digits table to pick out 10 people out of everyone in the school, 10 random people. Because I did not mention groups or anything of that sort, this one would be an SRS. We also used a random digits table, so that would make everyone equally likely. Next, we have randomly choosing 10 people out of all seniors, 10 people out of all juniors, 10 out of all sophomores, and 10 out of all freshmen in a school. You can see that we've definitely split into groups, so it's either cluster or stratified. And now we have to choose between the two. We definitely have a trait here, and that is grade level. So it looks like there are strata based on grade level, and therefore that would make this a stratified sample. And finally, we have choosing one classroom out of the school and surveying everyone in there. So here, we didn't go by any traits, but we still chose a group. So this one classroom is the one that we hope is representative of the whole school, and we took a census of that classroom. So that would make this cluster sampling. Now we have multi-stage sampling. This one is used a lot in political surveys when they randomly choose a state and then a county and then a neighborhood and then a block to survey. So this is when you use sample methods multiple times or you combine them together. So the political example that I just used, they did an SRS of all the states, an SRS of all the counties in the state, and then another SRS of all the neighborhoods, block, etc. Systematic sampling is when you survey every couple people. So let's say you surveyed every 12 people walking into a school about how they get to school. This can be a little bit risky because it's really easy to introduce unrandomness into the sample. If you get to the school and you just start counting from the first person that you see, this introduces bias because you chose the first person to start from. What you always need to do when you do systematic sampling is to have a random seed. You get a number from a random digits table, let's say it's 9. So first you count off 9 people, and from the 9th person, you start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So your first person has to be a randomly selected one. Next, we have a pilot study. So this is a trial run of your survey on a smaller group of people so that you have a general idea of what your results are going to be like. For example, if I wanted to see how my survey would go in a whole school, I could first run it on a small classroom to have a general idea of what kind of results I'd be getting back. So some practice. Asking every 12th person in the school cafeteria what their favorite food is. So you already see every nth people, so that would make this one systematic. And you can see a problem with this one, and it's that this one did not mention a random seed, so this one may have bias. Next, out of all schools in America, picking one school and then one grade within the school and then one class to survey. You can see there's multiple steps here, so first they chose a school, then a grade, then a class. So that would make this multi-stage. And then finally, surveying your class to get an idea of what results will be like before surveying the whole school. So this looks like you want to have a prediction or a general idea of what you're going to get before generalizing to the whole population. So this would be a pilot study. Now you have some bad sampling types that you'll see a lot. The first one is voluntary response sample. So this is when responding is optional. These samples are the surveys you get in the mail, so when you get from your spam calls, you don't have to respond to these. And this introduces a lot of bias in that the people that do respond likely have very strong opinions and want to share their opinions. People that are more on the neutral side are less likely to care as much, and therefore also less likely to respond. So that creates a sort of silent majority. Next we have convenience sampling. So this is when you ask the easiest group of people to sample. So this is used a lot by companies, so when they want to know something about a population, a lot of the times they'll just ask their customers because these are the easiest people for them to contact as opposed to people in the general population. So there will introduce some bias. So first, a company asking everyone who opens their site to answer a survey. This one is an interesting one because first you already see a company asking people who open their website. So that seems to be convenience sampling already because they're asking an easy group of people to reach. But when you open their site, the survey is probably optional as well. You don't have to answer their survey. So this would make it both voluntary bias and convenience sampling. So this one has two types of bias. Next, you have asking the first 10 people into school about their opinion on something. So let's say it's really cold outside and you don't want to stand outside for too long, so you just pick the easiest group of people to reach. So the first 10 people into the school, you get your answers, you're done. So that would make this a very convenient sample. So this one is convenience. Because whenever you see the words like first few people, oh, that is not how you spell it, oh geez. When you ask the first group of people about something, that is almost always going to be convenience. Because you just want to save time, you ask some people, you're done with it. Next, you have leaving a survey out on a table for people to fill out if they want. If they want. That shows you that this is voluntary. Finally, you have some more bias sources. The first one is using a bad sampling frame to begin with. So the people that you're choosing from are already biased. So going back to my Starbucks sampling, if my sampling frame was everyone inside a Starbucks shop, that is already a bad sampling frame because this shows that these people already like coffee or Starbucks in general. Next, we have undercoverage. So this is when you missed some part of the population, and when you're sampling the entire country or something, this is a very easy bias mistake to make. So the one that they used to do a lot was they would take the phone books and then take random people out of there. The problem is that they're missing people without phones, so they might be missing a large proportion of the homeless or those in prison, so that would be a major source of undercoverage. Now we have non-response bias. So this one is basically the opposite of voluntary response bias. It's when people choose not to respond. This would be me choosing not to answer that vegetarian survey, or you hanging up on the spam survey call. And finally, you have the surveyor's problems. So you could word a question badly, or having a surveyor that already biases opinions. So for example, if you have a tattooed person going out and asking people their opinion on tattoos, this is one major source of bias that you need to try to avoid. Another one is the way you word the question. If you use really strong words, you're likely to introduce some bias as well. That's it for sampling methods. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. Peace.